Hey, this is an interview for Mr. Jackson's class. Is it okay if I use this footage?
Yes.
Okay. What is your current name, age, and occupation?
My name is John B. Carter Jr. That's Carter, Carter. I'm a retired accountant, and I had worked for a major chemical company, and I'm 85 years old.
Okay. Um, where did you live during the Vietnam War?
The war went on for a long time, and I lived in several states. I moved many times. I lived in Louisiana and West Virginia and New York.
Okay. Did you have any experience in the military?
Yes, I served for 4 years in the Navy during the Korean War. I had some involvement with North Vietnam.
Okay. Um, what were you doing during the time of the war occurred?
The Vietnamese War,
Yeah.
I was working for Union Carbide Corporation, a major chemical company.
Okay. Were you in? Did you graduate from college by then?
Yes, I graduated in 1957.
Okay. Um, were you in support for the Vietnam War or were you against it?
I was against the war in both Korea and Vietnam.
Why were you against the war?
Well, because I considered the war to be between, in my estimation, it was a civil war, and we had no good reason to be involved in it other than maybe it was helping the economy.
Why do you think the United States got involved in the war?
Well, the official reason was to stop the spread of communism to Southeast Asia, and you know, I was against the involvement in the war because I felt that the communists were being supported all over the world by the Soviet Union, and they were going to go bankrupt. So, my position was just let them have it.
Okay. How did you feel about the war at the time?
Uh, I felt both during the Korean War, which I was involved in, and the Vietnamese War, which began after I was out of the Navy. But my position was that these are civil wars between the North and the South, and we have no good reason to be involved in them.
Why did you think that?
Why did I think that? Because it was the North fighting against the South. I mean, in Korea, it was the North Koreans trying to take over the South, and in Vietnam, it was the North Vietnamese trying to take over the South.
Okay. Did you think that Vietnam needed us to intervene, or do you think that if the United States did not get involved, that it would ended better?
Well, what I said was that the North in both Korea and in Vietnam, the North was much stronger than the South. And in Korea, they almost did overrun before we intervened, and then we pushed them back, and then the Red Chinese came in. But in Vietnam, the South was a little stronger. President Eisenhower put military advisors and trainers into South Vietnam shortly after the North Vietnamese took over the North. The French surrendered in 1954. That's when the North took over North Vietnam. Okay.
In what ways were you affected by the war?
I don't know of any way I was affected by the Vietnamese War because I'd already served, 4 years in the Navy, and I graduated from college in 1957. So, I was working for a big chemical company, and I wasn't really involved at all.
Yeah, did you see any political ads on TV or like around your school or your work or anything?
Well, I may have seen some ads on TV, but I don't remember any of them.
Okay. In your opinion, how was this war different than other U.S. Wars? Do you think that it was more brutal or what?
Well, the Korean War was more brutal, but because it was like kind of like World War One, where you had two sides facing each other and they were sort of stalemated. But in Vietnam, it was a guerrilla war, which is a completely different kind of warfare than two sides confronting each other directly. I mean, so, in some ways it was worse, and also the draft was going on, and a lot of our troops got involved with drugs, and it wasn't a very good situation for the U.S.
Okay. How did the media coverage in Vietnam, like, was it on TV, on the news and stuff?
Oh yeah, there was stuff on TV every day.
Were they depicting it like different than like it was actually is, or do they like speaking the truth about everything?
As far as I know, George, they weren't particularly trying to slant the news and either direction. Although as the war went on, the mood in the country became quite different regarding the war. I mean, in the beginning, probably most people were in favor of it, but toward the end of the war, most people were against it. And there was a lot of demonstrations going on around the country after several years into the war.
Do you think the Vietnam War made LBJ's presidency, or do you think that LBJ what he did about the Great Society was more important than the Vietnam War?
LBJ was the first president to put major combat troops into Vietnam. I mean, JFK put him in, but Johnson put a whole bunch of people, several 100,000. He escalated the war.
Okay. What were some of the events that you remember about the war?
Well, I remember Shaolin Lao, I think that was the name of it, or something like that, where we massacred some civilian people in a village because we thought they were supporting the officers that allowed that to happen, thought the people there were supporting Vietnamese military, and he had his massacre people. And that was a big event, a big thing that turned people against the war. But otherwise, all I remember was it was guerrilla warfare, and we didn't have a lot of experience fighting guerrilla warfare.
Okay. Do you think that the Vietnam War not only affected the U.S. and Vietnam? Do you think it affected the world, like on a large scale, or do you think that it was just like a small scale war?
Well, I don't think it was small scale, but in terms of who it affected probably the countries right around Vietnam, because there was some involvement in Laos and other places in the war, some controversy. But as far as the world in general, I mean, outside of how it impacted the U.S., I don't know that it had a great impact on any other country. There were probably other countries like Australia and Canada that had some troops in there supporting us, although I don't remember the details. But normally those two countries and the British, the Australians, the British, and the Canadians generally were involved in any kind of military conflicts on our side. But I don't remember exactly how they were involved in Vietnam.
Do you think the war, like it affected the global economy?
Well, as far as the economy was concerned, there was a major impact on the U.S. economy, and if anybody remembers, at the end of the war, we had a little, well, it wasn't a little, we had a recession. When Nixon got the war stopped, we pulled our troops out, we had a recession right after. So I would say, it boosted our economy while it was going on.
How was the leadership of the country and the military at the during this time?
Uh, well, the president was all for that. Although I think Johnson, toward the end of his term in office, I think he refused to run for the last term he could run for because he regretted, I think, some of the things that he caused to happen during the war, and that's what he stated he wouldn't run for president again, although he could have gotten another term. So, that's what I remember.
Okay. How are you or someone you know affected by the war?
Well, I had some involvement with North Vietnam in 1954 before the French surrendered. We spent 45 days outside of North Vietnam. I was on a big aircraft carrier. I worked in air intelligence and I had a top secret clearance, so I pretty much knew everything that was going on. And Eisenhower was going to intervene on the French side, except they didn't want us. They told us to stay out. And at the last minute, Eisenhower changed his mind and we left after 45 days, and the French surrendered the next week. So, that was my direct involvement with otherwise, it's just I got out of the military at the end of 1954, and I didn't have any direct involvement with it after that, and it didn't impact my work. It didn't affect me.
Okay. In what ways do you think the war affected the United States?
Well, it affected a lot of people's opinions about whether or not we should be engaged in such activities, and it directly influenced people's opinions later on regarding the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those are two places I know it had some impact on people's opinions, especially the Iraq War.
Okay. In what ways do you think it affected the world, long term and short term?
Well, I'm not sure that it had any effect on the world. I mean, conflicts go on all the time. I mean, what's going on now. I mean, it just moved from one area to another area. I mean, there's always something going on. So I can't say that it had really had any direct impact in the sense that these things tend to occur over and over in different places.
Well, thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you for the interview.
Okay, George, you're welcome.